here. All right. Hello and welcome to today's edition of the Cardea work group. So we have a small attendee list at the moment, but we'll go through our normal housekeeping procedures. So the first is around the antitrust governance of this group, and that's the Linux Foundation's antitrust policy. It's in our meeting minutes here, which I will put the link to in our chat so that you can access these links if you need them, or also participate in the note-taking today. The code of conduct is generally be nice to people, and you can find the link on the meeting notes. If anybody has issues, you can reach out to Ken or myself or the Linux Foundation, but we'd hope you start with one of us. And that code of conduct can be found, as I said, at the link. I think we are among friends today, so we can skip introductions unless somebody is so motivated, and jump into our discussion. So we want to start with a couple of things about the interop profile, and these are in preparation for the next interopathon, which is scheduled for January. And the first is the question and answer protocol, which we've discussed a little bit at previous meetings, but wanted to bring up again and kind of unpack that discussion a little bit. So Mike, can you give us a brief reminder about the question and answer protocol, and then we can talk about how it's functioning now, if there's questions around how it should function and its future?
Okay, so the question and answer protocol is kind of like a modified basic message protocol. Essentially, you could, in theory, have a conversation between two people using agents where, you say, hey, I would like to do X and Y, such a thing. I need some information from you. Could you provide me the answer? And someone could use the basic message protocol to respond with their answer. But the question and answer protocol formalizes that structure a little bit so that the person doing the asking can say, here is something that we're very clearly labeling as a question, and we're going to provide some of the inputs that we'd like to see so that there's like a standard formatting. There's no concern about, less concern about ambiguity, things like that, so that you could have a clear question and a clear answer. And then the person receiving the question can use the same protocol to select one of the options and send a response. So, you could proctor a test over an agent if you really felt like it, using question and answer. The reason that we are interested in question and answer at the moment is that we're working towards support for some really robust and powerful and interesting capabilities for generating, figuring out how to verify people's health credentials and how to generate the proper presentation requests, and how to use the protocols to answer, ask that very complicated question: can you prove to me that your health records are in order? But since we're not fully there to the grand vision of where we want to be, where you could ask one very large question through a presentation request that says, here are all the options for how to prove that you are healthy, and have your agent sort out which one to grab and present. Since we're not all the way there yet, a way to kind of work with things in the short term is to ask a simple question that says something like, we need to see your health credentials. We need to verify that you are healthy. And there are lots and lots of options, but here's a list of some of the options that are available. Which one would you like to use? So in the case of COVID, for example, you could say, I would like to use a PCR test, or I would like to present a vaccination or a series of vaccination credentials, or I have an exemption. And depending on your governance, so some governance I'm working with recently, in Aruba, they say PCR test, okay, that's great. If you say I want to use a vaccine, they say, okay, we'd love to see your vaccines, but they're seeing issues with vaccinated people still able to share the disease, and so you also need a PCR test. Or if you present an exemption that says I don't need a vaccine, then they say, well, if you aren't going to share a vaccine, go ahead and present to us a test also. But the basic idea would be, let's ask someone how they want to share their health information, and then based on their answer, the requesting agent will formulate a proof request or proof requests that are limited to that particular answer. So with COVID, there's 4 or 5 different test types and 8 plus different vaccines, and there are multiple kinds of exemptions. And if you try to present if you tried to request proof for all of that at once, and then hope that the user could sort it out and find the one that's appropriate for them, that puts a really big burden on the user. But if you can ask them a simple question with a drop-down list of options and they just select one, then suddenly they're dealing with 1 or 2 or 3 proof requests instead of 15.
Got it. And just to play devil's advocate with that thought for a second there, Mike, one distinction is that it's also sort of user advocacy, consumer choice things, right? Where the Q&A process helps expand the user's direct, explicit interaction with these protocols rather than having some of that happen behind the scenes, right?
Well, so in an ideal universe, you would have a system that understands all of the options and helps the user to select them from the holder or the wallet side. By asking this question, the things like progressive disclosure or questions like this can sort of, or either very much do, or in the case of a question, sort of reveal information about the user to the verifier, even if they can't necessarily meet the terms of the verification. So in an ideal world, you'd say, here are all of the options, and you can pick any one of them, or you can tell us that you're not going to present any proof at all, and thereby expose nothing about yourself until you can meet the requirements. If you were to ask questions that say, are you over 65, or are you coming from this particular country, or are you going to present if you say I'm going to present a vaccine, then people could start to say, well, we know this person's over 65 and that they're from the United Kingdom, and then you get to the end of the list of questions and you receive the proof request and you send your presentation and you don't meet the requirements. So they were able to gather information about you, that without having you even need to present anything.
Right. In the world of healthcare, that's called an incidental disclosure.
Yes. So, it'd be nice to protect against incidental exposure and not have to use question and answer. But due to the limitations of our system for asking those complicated list of presentations or options, this is the best thing that we can manage. So in an ideal universe, we'll have a holder that can help you sort through all of the different options. But in the meantime, we'll ask a couple questions that help you, narrow things down and engage you and get your approval and consent and so on.
So by asking the leading question, you can pare down the list to from 47 options to maybe 3, so that they have something that a human brain might be able to comprehend and intelligently respond to it.
Right. You can manage a very complicated interaction using any agent that supports question and answer. And, so using existing agents, you can make this happen rather than having to wait until we get the pie in the sky versions ready to go later.
Do you envision this being a series of questions and answers, or a single question is adequate for Cardea?
I would think we'd have to support a series, even if people choose not to implement them.
So the technology will support a series, and I think that for the use case that we have coming immediately, that we'll probably get by with one question. But the, as the COVID understanding becomes more, elaborate or nuanced, we may end up needing more questions. But we're going to, fewer questions is better. And so I think we're going to start with just one for the immediate future.
And I think the other, in sort of trying to keep with our theme of when you put this on the ground, does it work? Is if you're you're standing at I want to go into this restaurant, but wait, I have to stand on my phone and answer all these questions so that we can finish this transaction. That's problematic in terms of actually being able to do what you're trying to do in terms of being a human on the planet.
So gratefully, this particular question is during the
Like
pre-trusted traveler registration process, where you're already answering a whole bunch of other questions, filling out forms, adding all sorts of detail. And so this is a minor blip on the radar at that point.
Right.
By having our trusted traveler derivative credential, when you get to the restaurant, all of the complicated questions are answered and you get a quick yes, no based on your trusted traveler. But your point to, does it work on the ground, is definitely important here. We may say one question isn't enough, 5 questions is too many, or this is completely inadequate after we tested it, but so far it's looking like a good answer for handling, the situation as it is right now.
Right. And the idea that in this, in the use case we're solving right now, doing this in the step that creates the trusted traveler credential, that is then the one that you're using, helps alleviate the problems for the user on the ground, because you've done that step in advance, and then it's like, yep, just this one. Yep, just this one, and we're on. So in the context of using trusted travelers, the issue around questions and answers gets minimized. But if that weren't part of the ecosystem of the thing you were implementing, that might be a bigger problem.
Exactly. So if we use a trusted traveler, then you can ask the question once and then answer it, through the credential over and over again instantly. If you're going to just verify health credentials directly, then yeah, this would be a question that you have to answer every time. How do we sort out all of the particular options? So one more thing in favor of a trusted traveler, I guess.
Or derivative summary
or a
credential.
Derivative of some kind. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
And this is being implemented both on the kind of the cloud hosted agents, the Python agents for particularly this occurs during verification, right? Or is this being used as part of the issuance process as well?
So we're using this, I think in the current process, there's one place where there's one application for a client, which I'm not going to disclose in case I can't remember the NDA accurately or whatever, but there's an application where they are selecting between different forms of proving your identity. So whether you're using a driver's license, a passport, self-attested, something like that. So there's a question and answer that may happen there. And that's part of the issuance process. You're verifying a previous or other credential in order to issue something new. And then we ask the question about, okay, now let's do the same thing. Let's verify health credentials and then issue something new. We're not using it during trusted traveler verification.
I think, wouldn't you use it? You would need to use it on the request for a credential, though. Is that, I don't know, maybe that's a different protocol, but for example, I've enrolled in a wallet and now I'm going to say, I would like to request this credential to be issued to me instead of that credential, right? I want my vaccine or not my lab test, or I'm looking for my lab test, has nothing to do with vaccine. Is that a Q&A process or is that a different thing? Like the person, the traveler, whomever, the person who's holding the phone that's asking for their credential to be issued to them on the issuance side.
So
Very good, Keela. That perhaps is a hole in my workflow. I don't know that I'm asking which credential they want because
Because it's
in all of
different
our,
APIs in the background.
so every trial that we've done for this so far has been a manual process whereby you have a human asking or already knowing which one
Which
it
one?
is. So that would be a good use of a question and answer, is to say that we have several credential options that are available to you. Which one are you trying to get?
Right.
And you could do that with question and answer, or you could do that if you have a custom apps UI, you could do it in the UI. I think in this case, since we're trying to support multiple holders or wallets, we probably ought to ask that question at the lab issuance point. In fact, the other thing that's happened is we've had specialized issuers which only issue one health credential. Like we only do labs, and this other one says we only do vaccines. So the Bronx Rio is the first case where there are more than one credential option to choose from, and where it's can be done by API without a human. So very, very insightful.
And I think that will become more common, right? Because really, exactly how the interfacing is going to happen is still to be finalized and will change and evolve, right? But the reality is that health systems are consolidating, at least all over the US, right? So the mom and pop shop where it's like, well, you only have this thing and you only have that thing, right? Or you go to Walgreens and you get your vaccines and your medications and they do testing, right? So they do more than one thing. And so as we expand what you care about, especially with even just using labs and vaccines, there more places are doing both.
Right, and that's not in fact, it's been that way where health providers or systems handle many, many different things. It's been that way for a long time. This is definitely a shortcoming of the solution as based upon limited trials, where now we're trying to get it to grow up and be ready for production ready situations. And so yeah, that's definitely an important thing. One good thing about the question and answer protocol is that as long as the holder wallet understands how to receive and then answer questions, that means that as the health systems and the issuing agents grow larger and more complicated, the holder doesn't need an upgrade to add an additional question or three. And so, or if you can drop a question or whatever, then you don't have to change the phone's UI. It's all up to the issuer or the verifier to change which questions they'll ask in their code. And
because I have another use case to put in the mix, which is that I think question and answer would be relevant for, which is, okay, so you asked me for stuff, but I have a question about, did you get your first COVID shot on, which of these days did you get your first COVID shot? Where it's sort of like, if you've ever used Experian to verify something about you, they say, which of these addresses did you previously reside at? And you have to like pick which one, sort of like an identity verification thing. That may have to happen at the data side because the bar on health data is so much lower, to say, I think I found you, but could you just answer this question before I issue your thing so that I make sure I really got the thing you're looking for?
Yes, that's another good use case for something like this, where either you need to have them prove who they are by knowing something, or like you said, help narrow down a pool of results or something like that. That's a valid use of this. And a lot of these use cases stick, even if we fix the 47 options, help the user select one situation to where it doesn't need a question and answer. Some of these other question and answer use
go away.
cases will not go away, even if you fix that particular one. So it's good to add to what's supported by the platform for multiple reasons.
Which segues us, unless Ken has another question here, but that segues us into the question, to the sort of like, what is the future of the Q&A thing? Because I think, we've hinted that there are potentially more efficient ways to go about it, but we've also just said that there's use cases where it won't go away. So what do you see as the evolution of the support for this?
So the implementation of the protocol itself is really simple. And, once the holders support it, and once it's available to the issuers and verifiers, then which questions you ask and at which points, that can become flexible and dynamic. It's actually a really good use case for governance to say, we have a workflow. Let's insert a question and answer here in the middle and branch our flow based on the answer. And so I can't foresee every possible useful application for the question and answer protocol, but gratefully, once it's implemented, and then especially once it's in governance, it becomes pretty flexible and powerful for anything we can dream up to use it later on.
Okay, and then, sorry, go ahead, Ken.
I foresee the question and answer protocol remaining useful forever because it handles things that are outside the scope of presentations. Even if you get a very complex presentation definition that is now supported, there's still sometimes that the user's input might be sought to guide the issuing agent or the verifying agent to the path that the end user prefers to have a happier interaction. So I don't see that the question and answer going away. I think its role might evolve over time to be less necessary when a complex presentation can handle it and the holder's agent can respond to it intelligently. But I think it's always useful as a medium for exchange of the user's input.
When we're seeking to develop this whole ecosystem to be relationship based, you could even have kind of a chat UI or whatever, and reduce people's dependence on understanding what is a presentation or a credential or a protocol. And so, you may be able to implement something like a frequently asked questions tree, or you may be interacting with your general practitioner and trying to just diagnose what kind of head cold or disease you have, and you have a list of pre-built questions that help narrow what disease, to figure out how to do that. Or you work with your nurse practitioner to say, are you following your treatment plan, and how do we react to, how do you adjust your prescription? There are all sorts of things where you could have a useful tree of questions with question and answer that have nothing to do with the presentations. And all right, now I'll shut up so James can say something.
Yes, go ahead, James.
Yours was a perfect comment there, Mike. Mine was slightly towards the technical side, that we expect to have some revision on the current protocol version. So some additional, like a new version, so like a 2.0 or a 1.1, based off of the it's kind of an old protocol, so there's some things that have changed in areas, and then additionally, I think there's some things that we would want added to the protocol. Like, for instance, right now you do have to provide a list of valid answers, while there could be a use case in which you want to ask a broad question and receive anything that is a text answer, for instance. And currently it only supports text, which means you may want some kind of capability for additional types of questions. So for instance, asking something about a date could be more challenging. So I think we've had some discussions that we may do some further iteration of the protocol, at least from a technical perspective.
Got it. Sorry, I'm just moving my screens around here. Okay. So in terms of the what's it called? Interopathon. In terms of the Interopathon, can we briefly just cover what about Q&A will be ready? Is there anything that we need to expose or discuss about that specifically? I'm just going to stop and reshare in 1 second here. In order to make the community aware for the Q&A at that point.
So for the next Interopathon, holder agents should support the ability to receive and answer a question so that the issuers and verifiers will be able to ask the questions they need to ask. As far as people who are providing issuers or verifiers, they probably have questions that they'd like to ask, or if they're going to follow our reference implementation of, how to work through the tree of available options for presentations or something like that. If they're going to follow our example code from the reference implementation, then they'll also need to support question and answer. And there should be an example for them to look at and say, okay, this is how we do it. Let's figure out how to do the same thing within our agent.
So basically all three agents, issuers, verifiers, and holders should support Q&A, and an example code for each would be available. Is that correct?
I mean, I suppose that there's someone who is super clever out there who is going to figure out a way to manage the presentations, the verification workflow for health credentials or something. It's possible they have a better way to solve it without needing question and answer. But if they're going to emulate the reference implementation, then yes, they'll need question and answer, and yes, there will be source code available.
Actually, you're probably not planning to use Q&A on the very end verification of a trusted traveler. It's probably pretty straightforward, right?
Right. There are different parts of verification. So if they're a health issuer, then they'll probably want to verify identity. Or if they're a trusted traveler issuer, then they'll want to verify health credentials. But if they're like a hospitality or a whoever's verifying trusted travelers, then there's no question answer needed there.
All right.
Okay, cool.
I think we should move on to our next agenda item. That was all very interesting. Are there any questions before we do that? Or last comments on the Q&A process? All right. Then let's move on to the binding of an individual to their agent or wallet. So this came up just to frame our discussion here. There's a little bit of, there's been an assumption perhaps, and you know what assumptions means, which is that it's one person, one phone, one device, let's say. And so therefore what I have on my device belongs to me and my person. However, there are many use cases that might not be the case, right? A parent and child, a husband and wife, a guardian for somebody, etc. Or if you're speaking, we've been talking about a little bit about inclusion here. If you're speaking about inclusion, then potentially for communities where cell phones are not ubiquitous technology, maybe a few people are sharing a phone. So that raises the question of how do you silo, and how do you manage the fact that there might be credentials for multiple identities on a single device, and making sure that those are bound to the identities and separated, and the wires aren't crossed there. So
in the
go
case
ahead.
of adults, it'd be really nice if, even if you had multiple people using the same device, that each legal adult would have their own wallet, so that you could say, we're tying this wallet to these biometrics, so that by opening it, providing the biometrics and opening the wallet, that everything in that wallet is around that person. In an ideal world, that's how I would hope to handle the multiple identities. Now, where things get tricky is when you have children, because you would need a parent to be able to unlock, if you're going to tie the identity to the biometrics, if you have an infant, they're not going to be able to unlock the phone using, I guess you could do it, but unlocking the phone with their fingerprint or their face scan or whatever is going to be a lot harder. So I don't know if it's perfect when you start to have, guardianship kind of situations where someone is managing the device and the credentials on behalf of someone else.
Although guardianship isn't always going to be to a child, just to be clear, right? You might have
right.
disabled adult or something like that.
Yeah, that's just the first example that springs to mind, but you're right. There are lots of cases where, you may even have somebody who's not physically disabled, but there are drug use cases where people are, drunk or high or whatever out of their minds and can't use the device, and someone has to do it for them or something like, lots of cases, but yeah, exactly.
Yes, and there's a name for that, which is being elusive, but it'll come to me at some point.
Yeah, and I don't know that.
So I also would just point out, if we look at technology today, if you're traveling as a family, if we just use something that's current, right? You can put your airline ticket in your Apple Wallet if you are an Apple user, but you probably did it for your whole family and you just swipe through them. You're not re-biometricing every time to say, okay, well, hold on. You're doing that at the TSA agent now, right? Because they're doing a human intervention. But in terms of ease of use in an app, to say, okay, here's mine, and then your husband or partner, whatever, you do yours, that's a little weird. Just as a point. So I guess the question is, and we raised this a little bit, is it different wallets that is sort of the industry standard here? Do you know, Mike? Are you able to speak to that at all? I know we were hoping that Sam was going to be here, which he isn't, but do you have any insight?
Well, so that's the problem, is that I don't know for sure here. That's part of why I wanted to ask Sam, or maybe James has heard something or whatever about how to handle this. And the reason that I'm concerned a little bit here is that if you can't assume that you have separate wallets, then that means that you could have one wallet with credentials for various people commingled. And so if, for example, in the travel use case, you go to say, here's my passport for John Doe, and then you go to and proceed to present the health credentials for Mary Doe, when you go to pass through, then suddenly it's, you have this great swirling mass of credentials that may or may not be associated with each other properly. And you would then have to say, each piece of data on its own would have to be satisfactorily either verified or linked to something that's verified based on the data rather than on who, which agent or wallet is holding it. And that gets to be messy. Like, for example, if your health credential has to include your driver's license or passport number, then all of a sudden, you have a master key whereby you could be tracked everywhere just by, sharing your health credential. Now that person has your driver's license number, and they would have to in order to verify that it's tied to you. And suddenly it's like the Social Security use case where, it's everywhere and it's being, used in ways it wasn't meant to be used. And so it feels icky to me to have to modify all of our credentials in order to do identity linking just because of, the limitations on how they're stored or whatever. So I really did need some outside advice, and I'll listen for any ideas here.
I wonder if there's other business sectors that could help us with this, right? This isn't unique to what we're doing problem. This is a wallet credential problem, regardless of the industry, right? So there may be other industries that are a little further down solving this path that we should try to recruit for some insight.
It's possible, but currently a lot of the technology is centered around single use cases. The dependent or custodial type of credentials are very immature. And so this is a kind of green field. It's kind of like machine readable governance. Although it had been talked about a little bit in the community, no one had done anything to actually implement it. And so I think we may be bumping into that same interesting conundrum. Some people don't care about the tight binding of identity to the credentials. In fact, they allow you to take a PDF and wander around with it wherever you want to and share it with your friends, neighbors, and Photoshop it. And so the concern for tight binding of identity to the credential is one that I think that this community values higher than some other communities. The other interesting part of it is as you start to push into custodial wallets, not in the sense that they're held at in a cloud hosting for a user. That's one type of custodial wallet, but a custodial wallet that deals with either minors or disabled persons or illiterate persons. Those are situations where this is, I think, kind of covering an area that's immature in the community and needs a little bit more thought and effort put into it. But I know the current wallets, one user, one wallet, one agent, all on one phone. And that's pretty much the extent of it today. I don't know of any wallets or agents that support multiple agents on the same phone. And it's James, are you aware of anything that's going on in that area?
We lost James, I think.
I bored him to death. I'm not
That's
aware.
interesting. That's a little disappointing, but here we are on the edge of new, which is always fun and presents its challenges.
But I do think Mike's comment about having the wallet tied to an individual user or an individual person is the least complicated mechanism for isolating those credentials. Otherwise, you're going to get into some really challenging bits trying to do that.
Well, the other, just because this is the world that I live in when not in this Cardea meeting, is when you think about the case of a minor, which is definitely a specific use case, but even guardians, right? The relationship between the guardian and the guardianee, I don't know what the name is for that person, the person who's underneath the guardian, can change. If you're a child, you become an adult who's then responsible for yourself. So also being able to pass the baton, right? Like the parent shouldn't have those records forever. The kid's going to want to say, okay, I'm an adult now. I have my own phone. Give me my stuff. How does that transfer happen, right? Or if your siblings taking care of mom, one person is the executor and then there's some change in the executor. And so you need to pass the batons or reissue or whatever that may be. We have to think that through also. if we're going to we have to tackle this problem, but that is a really important component of the problem.
This is Christy, and I definitely don't have the technical background of the people on this call, but I have a practical and legal background and with my use cases, there's some overlap because with my use cases, there would definitely be an agent that could
Be fired and
do
hired.
consent. Well, definitely that, but also that could issue consent or authorization or verification on behalf of a third party, and that would have to change. I heard that there was a comment that biometrics may be utilized or other verification means. The biometric data privacy laws, I think, are expanding. And you probably know Illinois was kind of the pioneer in that area with biometric data, especially if it's commercialized, which I know is not the case here, but there's different scopes of use of biometric data that's not just a security measure anymore. So, and it's biometric law is governed on a state-to-state basis at this point in the US, and then differently in different regions in the world. So that's one thing to consider, is just to make sure that whatever's determined aligns with and is pliable with biometric data privacy laws. And then I think what we were talking about before, either using a series of questions in this situation, maybe in this application, to determine how you connect a person with other people and what scenario, because each scenario will be different. If you're dealing with an incapacitated person that's inebriated or high, or some, for some other reason, temporarily incapable of doing something, that would be a different set of questions or verification for a person taking action on their behalf than a child or an adult that doesn't have the capacity to act on their own. So maybe a series of questions rather than biometric identifiers would be best. I know the point is to keep it simple at this point and problem solve, but just the 2 cents I have there.
A lot of this is going to move to beyond the issuer or verifier and holder wallet relationship, which is where the question and answer protocol is valid between agents. This is looking at things like how do we provision wallets, or find and unlock keys for the cryptography at the wallet level within the user interface of a particular wallet, whether it be a mobile or a cloud-based one or something like that. There needs to be a way for the wallet to understand, here's how I figure out who is in charge of what's going on and how I find the keys, and then unlock things that are relevant here in this case, but not in others, depending on the qualifications for being the guardian or the executor or whatever. And so I think that there's no way around this having to be at least partially addressed at the wallet or application level.
And when you do that, I think we've talked about this at other meetings, but if I'm utilizing in a certain application for a one-time use, then it will text me a code to my mobile phone, right? And I can put that into the apps that I'm using. They'll verify my identity. Is that something that can be utilized in any way in this scenario where we're talking about, say, a family traveling together and you have a parent trying to verify on behalf of a number of children that maybe you don't have the kind of PDF example that was given that you can Photoshop it and pass it around, but you have a little bit more flexibility, but it's still controlled by some mechanism such as that, getting a code texted to you for you're going to verify 5 people in one time using that one verification code.
But most likely they're using the same email. Like a mother is going to use their email for the kid. So that still doesn't necessarily solve it.
It's more like
Okay.
if you have an application that supports multiple wallets, then when you instantiate the wallet, the parent would say, I am instantiating a wallet for my child. here is their age, and based on their age, that means that I am the guardian. I'm going to use my fingerprint or passcode as the lock for this wallet. And once I will be able to unlock this wallet and thereby access the credentials for this separate identity. And inside that wallet, you'd have, you know, the credentials around identity or health or whatever. And the mother, by knowing the wallet application, you know, the mom provides the proper unlocking tools to get at the credentials, and then can act as if they were that child, you know, as the guardian to present that information. And then the wallet would say, you know, ideally, the wallet application would recognize when the kid's birthday, when they turn 18, comes around, and then say, okay, it prompts the user, okay, we need to do a handoff here. And are we going to, you know, rekey this wallet within the same application on the same device to a new fingerprint and a new passcode? You know, there's been discussion in the community about backup, restore, transfer systems for saying we're going to hand our data, we're going to take it from this wallet and move it to another one. So, you know, at the kid's birthday, let's migrate all this data to a new application, a new wallet on a different device. You know, so there, and that's how you would handle things if you're working on the assumption that there's a wallet per person. And that seems like a decent way, to me anyway, to kind of handle the, let's collect everything about one identity inside of one wallet, so that if you present an identity credential, then you can reasonably assume that everything else that's coming with it from this wallet or this DID is all bound together. It's a completely separate conversation if it has to be tied at a credential level within a single wallet for a bunch of people.
Okay,
I see
so
Simon's hand.
sorry, Simon, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I do. I think there's already some solutions out in the market that we can look at to see if there is any adoption that can be possible. So for example, I have 2 kids, and I have 2 different scenarios for them when I am taking the guardianship for them. For example, YouTube is one, and sharing an Apple ID, like getting an access to an app store for my kids are going through me as a guardianship. And so, for example, if my kid wants to go and install an application, he has access to his app store, which would be represented as a wallet in our case. So he can go there and he can look for whatever he needs to install. And then when he wants to install, he clicks the button, and I get a notification or a prompt to look at what he would like to install. And I use my identity to either accept and allow, or I decline whatever he's trying to do. So I think we can use something like that in terms of the wallet. Wallets, in my opinion, must be individual based to simplify the process and workflow. But the child should be able to have access to his wallet and the credentials. But whenever there's a verifier or an issuer trying to make a connection with my child, for example, then I, as a guardian, get a notification that this
They're using it.
Yeah, exactly. This specific verifier or an issuer is trying to communicate with the holder of my child. He is requesting the proof, or he's trying to issue this credential. Are we allowing this to happen? And I am on my end using my holder. I decide whether I do accept and allow, or do I decline for him. I think.
So Simon, just to call out one distinction in that scenario that you've just communicated, which is a really important one for us to have on the radar. However, your child has his own device, his or her own device, right? So technically, yeah, so that's one scenario, is that there is a minor who maybe shouldn't be allowed to make decisions, but they have their own device, and therefore they could have their own wallet. the other scenario is there's only one device to multiple individuals, and then what?
So Simon's extension, he said that there should be a wallet per individual, and his
Yes, I
use
did hear
case
that.
there, his use case there is a great extension of that use case where you could have one wallet per individual on the same device, or you could have one wallet per individual on multiple devices. And the application that manages those wallets will have to understand how to handle those situations. Let's do guardianship across multiple devices, or guardianship on one device with multiple wallets. Those are both valid, and in certain cases, one or the other is desirable. And those are questions that we'll have to answer and address at some point, but it's based on the fundamental assumption that there's one wallet per individual. And so if I were leaning personally towards a solution, that's kind of where I would go. But that's going to take some community buy-in to say, now we have to enforce. Like right now, you could take your wallet and get health credentials for yourself, and then get credentials for your, go through the Cardea process and get another trusted traveler. You could have trusted travelers for 6 people on one wallet. And so, there's a community decision to be made there about how to handle this custodial wallet for multiple people situation.
Okay, but that gives us, I think, Simon, that gives us some really interesting use cases to explore. And if anybody has or knows of any others, then certainly we can take that research offline and try to bring it to a future meeting.
There's 2 other topics here, the KYC process of that binding of a individual to a credential is part of the thing we need to talk about, and also the verification process. We don't have enough time to cover both of those in the last 3 minutes. So those can be future topics, but I would like to propose that we take December 23rd and December 30th off from our work group meetings. I don't think that we'll have sufficient attendance to warrant a meeting. Anybody have an opposing view on that? All the people who aren't here today. Up.
Yes, silence would suggest that that is acceptable. So we'll have to make a note to go through that groups IO thing and get that updated. And then we can send a reminder also in the Slack channel. All right. I think, are there any other comments around future topics or things that we should investigate as it relates to the guardianship multiple wallet challenge?
In regards to guardianship, I think that we need to focus on our particular use case and trying to get a health credential into a guardianship type wallet, and then presenting that to get a trusted traveler into that same corresponding user, whether it's done as one wallet with some tricky scheme for managing how you identify which person you're talking about, or multiple wallets that live on the same device. And then the tricky scheme for how you manage the wallets and allow for the guardian to have those credentials. I don't think we need to tackle the migration of credentials from a guardian's wallet to an independent wallet, or from guardian A to guardian B. Those are topics that are probably outside the scope of what we can accomplish, but interesting topics that will push back into the Aries community to try to get them to decide. But I think we're going to need to pioneer some of the custodial wallet work to make it happen. Otherwise, our dependency on that will cause us to support only single individuals traveling, and no sick person or disabled
families.
person or families can travel anywhere. And I think that would fall short of our goal.
Thanks, Ken. Okay, so with that said, we're at time, so we can adjourn, and we look forward to. So we have 2 more meetings before we take this little holiday break, I believe. if my math is right. And we look forward to next week.
Cool. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Take care.